Now, we had a couple of questions there. While the people are making their seats, can you give us your question? Put up your hand again and Karen will give you the microphone. You have it already. Okay, stand up, please. Can you stand up comfortably there?
Yeah. Given the huge amount of time and effort that the small number of illegal drugs cause in terms of crime in this country, and looking back at prohibition in the US and experiences in Europe like Portugal, I think it's time to revisit the strategy of a war on drugs and go for decriminalisation.
I think it's always a very interesting debate, and I think it's opportune now because the new national drug strategy is about to be finalised, and I know this week indeed their paper has been submitted, and the Justice and Defence Committee had looked at a number of other models, including the Portuguese model. I certainly think it's time to have a very rational and a very open and evidence-based debate. And certainly we in Garda Síochána would be very keen to have an input to that debate, because I do think it's time to look at what works and what will work into the future.
Yeah, Martin O'Malley, if I recall correctly, decriminalised small amounts of marijuana in Marianne, the possession thereof. What do you think of that one?
I think again there is a debate to be had.
Is there a suggestion that we're overusing resources on policing those small quantities?
Well, you know, again, I think it's important, and I know Dr. Sheila Willis, the Director of the Forensic Science Laboratory, is here. But, you know, it's very important that we look at actually what does that mean. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't, I'm not saying we shouldn't, I think we need to have a debate, because certainly what we are seeing, and from the point of view of the European Monitoring Centre for Drugs and Drug Addiction, what we are seeing is that some of the additives that we're seeing, particularly in the types of weed and hydroponic cannabis that we're getting now, actually have a number of derivatives which are causing a different type of addiction or different types of illness, and I think that's something that needs to be factored into the debate. And I know the Health Research Bureau are doing a lot of work on that, and I think it needs to be evidence-based and then a policy decision made.
Yes, Thomas, yeah.
Thanks. I suppose everybody has a consensus here about community policing, and we're all very proud of the fact that we have a largely unarmed police force looking after welfare. However, we spoke about community, you spoke very eloquently about community policing and the importance of it. I'm old enough to remember a time when my mother and father would have told me always respect the Garda and so on and so forth, and that was right. Then I grew up and salute a guard on the street, and you get a salute back, or in a car and you get a salute back. That seems to have died off considerably. I would raise my children in the same way, but they would have a much more jaundiced view of the Garda Síochána than I would, I say. So the first thing is, how do you get back to that situation of encouragement? I also lived within a puck father of a Garda station, and when I made a report one night I was asked my name, which I gave, and where did I live, and they said, where is that? That's another worrying aspect, that they don't always know the area that they're in as far as I can see. Second issue, if I can answer the second question, is in relation to why the deterioration over the years in the police force at the Garda Síochána. The corrupting influence of the troubles in Northern Ireland, in my view, had a large effect on the Garda Síochána here. And the close liaison between the Gardaí and the politicians, because they were depending on the Gardaí for their lives, in fact, meant that there was very little criticism by politicians of the Garda force over that period of time. And I think I've yet to hear a Garda Commissioner, maybe it'll be the first, and the Minister of Defence to disagree on whether there's sufficient funding of the Garda Síochána. You've always agreed that there is sufficient funding. And the final question is, I'll leave it at that for the moment.
But what about that one that, you know, every time there's a policing issue or concern, the Garda Commissioner is asked, is there any resources, and the Garda Commissioner always says, oh no, it's not a resource issue, I always have sufficient resources.
You know, I think there always has to be context on the question as well, because there's not a police commissioner or police chief in the world that I know or that I've met, including myself, that wouldn't say absolutely we need no more resources. And I know the Taoiseach, as our line minister, is here today, and indeed Minister Keogh, and I know that they have heard me several times saying this, we need more resources. But the reality is that actually you have to be realistic. And you know, you have to work with the resource set. It's always good to have more resources. But as I say, I think what is really important is a realisation and a shared understanding that policing is expensive. Policing costs money, but actually it reaps benefits. and you have to invest. And I think it's only fair and proper that as our economy recovers, that actually our police service is adequately resourced and adequately funded now and going into the future to make sure that we can reform. You know, the commitment to reform in Garda Síochána is second to none. We have what's called a modernisation and renewal programme, but it is a map of how we are making ourselves not a 21st but a 22nd century policing service. Our aim is much beyond reform, and I don't say this lightly, it's to become world leaders in policing. And Ireland have a very, very unique place to play. We have members who go and work internationally in the US, in the UN, and right across the world. And the professionalism is seen there, sometimes, quite frankly, before it is seen here. And I regularly get letters back saying how professional our police service is, and that's a great accolade. When we were doing our modernisation programme, we looked at police services the world over, the US, New Zealand, and we're very fortunate because we have the exposure there. And it's very much part of the journey that we're going on, but it is going to take investment, and ongoing investment.
There's been some suggestion in the news stories today that there may be resistance to civilianisation of Garda Síochána. Do you think there is a resistance to civilianisation and civilian senior management?
I think that there...
Are you resistant to it?
No, there is no resistance, and maybe if I can just provide again, you know, again in the programme for government, we have committed, the government have committed to increasing the overall workforce of Garda Síochána to 21,000. That's going to be made up of 15,000 Garda members, an increase from 2,000 to 4,000 civilian members, and 2,000 reserve members. And when I look at that, and we've already identified 400 of those civilian positions, and again with the right funding and with the right investment, those positions we very much welcome. And I prefer to think about, rather than civilianisation, and the debate that has always been is replacing guards with civilians. Actually, you know, it's about professionalisation. It's about making sure that professional policing is augmented with professional skill sets. So, for example, on the 2nd of August, we had a new Chief Administrative Officer who's at Deputy Commissioner level has started. He's a person that came to us from the local government management agency who will be known to some people in the room. We have a group of new professional civilian analysts have joined us, and we recently recruited a civilian executive director of HR. So civilianisation to augment the professionalism of Garda Síochána is very welcome. It's very much part of the future of Garda Síochána, and indeed our whole restructuring is designed to create new opportunities for professionals and civilians.
And what about the suggestion today that some of those senior managers are going to end up reporting directly to a Garda assistant commissioner?
In some cases they will, but also in the new structure we will have some Garda members reporting, as in the case of the Chief Administrative Officer and the Executive Director of HR. So it is change, it's changing culture. We have Garda members reporting to civilian line managers.
You talk about the reform programme. How important is it, do you think? I welcome your interview. I have never heard your interview before. How important is it to bring the public with you in that in communications, because you are in a new governance structure and you don't need or want to be ambushed in the media by either the police authority or anybody else. So you have to carry the baton, if you like, to bring the public, and you're in a political environment with you. So I think the old image that we have of the Guards is of a pretty conservative, closed, slow-moving organisation. So how are you going to square that, while at the same time doing your reforms below the radar, or acknowledging that there are things that you can't talk about?
I mean, what do you would say to that frustration at the pace of the reform?
I think the pace of change is frustrating even for me. And so maybe if I deal with the question of how do we bring the community with us. So what were the inputs into developing the plan that we developed was actually a lot of it was community consultation. We started a public attitude survey as well. And something interesting about that as well, just to make sure that the things we were doing were the right things. And some of the weighting that we attached to what we were doing was what has the biggest community impact. And when we went around the country talking to community groups and linking in with the community, the things we got back, what's important. And one of the first things that we heard was victims weren't always dealt with in the way they should be. People who were vulnerable weren't dealt with in the way they should. But an interesting little statistic, in April 2014, and some of my colleagues in the US and the UK are surprised to hear this, in April 2014 the Irish Times did a survey, and trust and confidence in Garda Síochána, after everything that had happened, had dropped to an all-time low of 67%. When we started our public attitude survey, what is it now, a year and a half ago, today I was just checking, and trust and confidence in Garda Síochána is restored to 87% in just over 2 years, and I think that's very. But you mentioned also in terms of bringing, so we got inputs from the community, we got inputs from the policing authority. We took all of the reports of the Garda Inspectorate, and the Garda Inspectorate are very important in all of this. The Garda Inspectorate have produced 11 reports into Garda Síochána, and a lot of them very high profile, but there are 1,085 recommendations in those reports.
Some of them damning.
Some of them extraordinarily damning, and some of them highlighting failures and things that were highlighted in a number of other reports, including Morris, including the most recent O'Higgins report. So what we did was we actually factored in all of those, believe it or not, 1,085 recommendations, not one by one, line by line, but thematically, standing away from it, which provides us with a North Star. I think the policing authority are going to play a huge role as well going forward, and particularly the public meetings with the policing authority, where we have an opportunity to be asked robust, challenging questions with the public present and been live streamed to the public, where we can actually answer these questions and where the public can hear exactly what's going on. Because I think that that's the right forum to be able to be challenged, to be able to answer the questions, that the public and the community can actually hear what's going on. And I don't think we should forget either about the joint policing committees and the local policing fora we have. Because as the programme rolls out, I think the joint policing committees and the local policing fora and the local accountability is really, really important to us, knowing that we're doing the right thing in the community.
Now, because you're being live streamed and you're facing tough questions to the public, I'm going to take the last three. If I see correctly, that's Senator Whelan.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I didn't plan on asking a question, but I suppose you have to take these opportunities. I'm asking this question, I suppose, not as a senator, but as a friend of the Mon family in Tallinn. And the question I want to ask really is what structures and resources and supports are put in place for families like the Mons and other families that stand up and name the gangs and the names of the people within the gangs that have murdered their children. It's a very brave and courageous thing to do, and since they've done that, they've come under enormous attack from this traveller gang who just 3 weeks ago dug up the grave of their other son, who have put pipe bombs in their garden as their children were there, and it just doesn't seem to end. And I'm just wondering what kind of supports are in place for families that are brave enough to keep demanding justice for their murdered children.
Yeah, thanks, Lynn. I don't intend to talk about the specific case, and I'm very, very aware of the case that you're talking about. And, I feel my sympathies go out to the Mahan family, because it's been a horrendous journey for them and horrendous things have happened. And we have a lot of engagement with them, and that's ongoing. But just in terms of what supports are generally in place, rather than talking about the specific, we have our Protective Services Bureau set up. We have local family liaison officers as well, so as in that particular case, but generally local family liaison officers, and there are supports available there to people, because it is very, people are having to deal with a lot of bereavement, then the intimidation that comes on top of that sometimes, and indeed, I'm not talking about the specific case that you're talking about, but in general, and I had a meeting with some community groups the other day, some of that intimidation can actually be from the community themselves. Some of them can be within families, and we're very, very conscious of that. So we have a lot of engagement with families who find themselves in those situations, and what I would do is encourage anybody that has difficulties or that is facing intimidation to come forward, and they will be supported by Garda Síochána, and any concerns they have will be taken seriously. And I also think, and I know the Mahan family themselves have looked for any information that anybody has in relation to the issues that are going on there.
There's one gentleman here in the middle who's had his hand up for a while. Karen will try to get a microphone there. And there's one gentleman here, and we'll finish it at that. Just gentleman here in the middle.
Thank you, and thank you, Commissioner, for a fascinating interview so far. You mentioned earlier the Special Criminal Court, and I remember coming up to the general election, certain voices were calling for the Special Criminal Court to be abolished. I was wondering how important do you think it is for you in the fight against crime, particularly organised crime, and would it be damaging to you if the Special Criminal Court was abolished? Thank you.
Yes, I think, the Special Criminal Court is a very important part of the institutional state. I think it has served the state very, very well over the last number of years and has allowed us to deal with a number of very difficult things. I think that nexus between what we're seeing now in terms of organised criminality, and indeed, people talk about terrorism. Domestic terrorism is not gone away. We're dealing with organised crime, and that has the news headlines today. But domestic terrorism, particularly in Northern Ireland, and our colleagues in the North face a very elevated threat level in the North, and indeed with the whole threat posed by international terrorism. I think that the Special Criminal Court is a very important part of the infrastructure of the state. From Garda Commissioner's point of view, when we are facing, and indeed it's the Director of Public Prosecutions, as you know, who decides whether or not a case will be tried before the Special Criminal Court. But at the levels of intimidation that sometimes people can face, I think it's very important that there is a mechanism in place that can actually deal with that outside of the normal circumstances of the courts.
Yeah, I think the question here.
First, I'd like to compliment you on the interview and the way you've articulated your ambition for Garda Commissioner. I think what you said there about having a world-class police force was very good, and the way you articulate that is very good. But you've got 1,085 recommendations to work on, and some of them won't come easy, and some will work pretty well. So what I would encourage you is to find a way to sell your successes, because there's a lot of negative stuff going on. The successes are pushed down a lot. So I'd encourage you to sell your successes and sell them well.
I think what he's saying is you should do more interviews. How do you switch off? Do you ever switch off?
Switch off. I have to be very careful because my husband's in the audience and he would say I was telling a lie if I said I do. So no, what I like to do is I like to take, for my downtime, what I like to do is just engage with friends. I'm very happy in my own company, and sometimes actually my own company is a good place to be.
Does your husband take offence at that you're happy?
I think sometimes it's rather delighted, but I let you ask him that.
What's the best day in the job? What are the best moments? What are the good moments? What are the good moments?
Well, do you know something? I think that the good moments, there are many good moments, and people would say, God, every day must be a bad day. Every day is a challenging day, but we have many, many good days. And for me, for example, graduations in the Garda College. I love graduations because it reminds me of why I joined in Garda Commissioner, but that sense of enthusiasm, that sense of pride that you feel in the families, in friends that come from the community, that sense of pride. And that sense of the hunger, the passion, just the energy that young people bring. And then there's that little poignant moment in the middle of it all when they throw their caps in the air and you realise that the graduation isn't like any other graduation. It's not like graduation from college, because these young people are going to step outside the gates of the Garda College, and they are literally going to, and I say this to them when I'm speaking to them, remember when you go out of here, you're representing yourself, you're representing your family, you're representing your community, but you're representing the Garda Síochána. But you're also going to, probably in your first week, see things and have to deal with things that normal people don't have to deal with. That terrible tragedy in Cavan a couple of weeks ago, a terrible horrific car crash, and a young person going out who's a human being behind the uniform. And then there comes a day that you're going to be called on to display your courage and your bravery. And you may be there on your own. You may be there on your own in the middle of the night. You may be there on your own in the middle of the morning. You may be the person who picks up the phone in the station to get the call, and you may have to go out to the back door of the house and see a note as happened in Cavan, and you don't know what's behind the door when you go into it. So it's that just little moment when you say, it's a really happy day, it's really the exuberance that's there, and I know some of you have been at graduations, it's wonderful, and they're the best days, and knowing that you have people who have that passion, who want to come, who want to join in Garda Síochána, and who want to make a difference to their communities.
And what are the worst days of the job?
Well, the worst days for me in the job, and I can remember too many of them probably. I remember as a young guard hearing the news that my colleague, Detective Garda Frank Hand, had been shot in Summerhill in County Meath and had died. And his wife Breda, who was a Bangor as well, and I would have been friends. Frank was a colleague. It could have been any one of us that were in the old centre detective unit at the time that were on that particular job. And I remember I suppose 2 other days was the day that I got the phone call from Pat McGee, the Chief Superintendent in Dundalk, about the fact that Adrian Donoghue had been murdered up at Lordship Credit Union. And I remember the call that I got from Kieran Kenny, the Assistant Commissioner, to say that Tony Golden, a guard in Omeath who had gone to help a victim of domestic violence and had called to the house, had been shot. And that the likelihood was that even though they had tried to revive him, his own colleagues at the scene, that he wasn't going to make it. And I think it's days like that and those calls are the worst days, because what it does, it just reminds you of that the loss of life. How do you tell Nicola Golden, how do you tell Caroline Donoghue, how do you tell Brina Hand that they've just lost their husband?
And without intruding, do you tell them, or do you talk to them after the look?
I talk to them after. Again, what you have to think about is them, their extended family, their loved ones, and then you have the community, and particularly Adrian Donoghue and Tony Golden, the impact on a small community up in Dundalk and right out there. It's just incredible, the impact on the community, and then the impact on the Garda family, because at the end of the day, the Garda family are a very strong family. And what it does is, we have had, unfortunately, and this is why Garda Síochána and the profession of policing is different than any other profession. It reminds you of the 88 colleagues that have died in the line of duty. The 88 people who have gone out, all men, who have gone out and never come home, and actually made that ultimate sacrifice in the service of civilised living. And it's moments like that remind you of that, and I think that's the worst days for me.
So that 21-year-old girl at the gates of Templemore, walking down on her own, she's risen to be Commissioner of Garda Síochána, the highest position. If you were talking to her now, would you say, "Are you crazy? We're going to shop." Or what advice would you give her?
I was going to say, get a life. Okay, what advice? Well, if I was that 21-year-old girl, I wouldn't listen to anyone's advice, so it'd be useless. But I think, okay, what would I say? I would say believe in yourself and don't fall at the first fence. And have that gritty determination and that resilience and that tenacity that you're going to need every single day of your life.
Noel Whelan, thank you for coming to me, Rob.